We've got Andrew from Canada who would like to ask us our opinion on what God's grace is. I'm going to answer this one, Andrew. I don't believe that there is a God, and I don't therefore believe that there is such a thing as God's grace. But do you?
Not quite the answer I was looking for. Basically, I can remember sitting in my car before I went to work multiple times going, it seems like God's grace is God lets you do whatever you want. And then I just kind of stopped there because I didn't know where to go from there.
Andrew, Morgoth's wrath, Morgoth's maliciousness, is that what prevented my car from starting that one late November morning in 1996? And is it just that
Great year.
Yeah. Morgoth's wrath and God's grace. Do you believe in Morgoth's wrath and maliciousness?
Actually, yeah. Because why would my life be so hard with so many people hurting me if God didn't have wrath?
Well, I'm talking about Morgoth. I'm talking about the big bad from the Silmarillion, Sauron's boss, one of the Valar, one of the Ainur, one of the children of Iluvatar, not to be confused with men and elves, but one of the earliest creations of Iluvatar. So what is the state of Morgoth, who became Melkor, enemy of all mankind? So why not Melkor's vindictiveness, wrath, viciousness? What is your opinion on that?
I have no opinion on that. You are talking about the Lord of the Rings. However, I've only heard those names. I have no clue what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, I've never met God. I don't believe that God exists. I don't believe that grace exists. It sounds like an interesting concept. I know that Melkor, who became Morgoth, twists the creations of the Valar into vicious creations. I know he does that because it's written down in a book. How do you know that God has grace that God bestows upon God's children?
I think that's the point at which I didn't know where to go. It did, like I said, it seems like God lets you do whatever you want. And
okay, threshold question, Andrew. Threshold question. Okay, you're calling in to Talk Heathen, and I know that maybe you don't know this, maybe you do know this. This is a show where at least Jmike and I, we do not hold that God exists. We do not hold the belief that God exists. I would go so far as to say that I believe that plenty of those gods definitely don't exist because they're impossible. But rather than getting down that path, which would take us probably the rest of today to answer, and there'd be many stumbling blocks along the way for me, not for Jmike. We don't believe that a God exists, so we don't believe that God has grace. So you're jumping over grace,
right? And
okay.
I think I gotta find my words at this point. When I say it seems like God lets you do whatever you want, then now that I've considered becoming an atheist, I go, well, it seems like if God lets you do whatever you want, then God really isn't needed at all.
God does let you do whatever you want, right? I mean, you can murder 1,000 million trillion human beings if you can find them, and then you can either you can go to hell or go to oblivion, or you could accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and personal Savior just before death, just as they're coming to get you or put you on the electric chair or lethal injection place, and then you can go to heaven, right? So you can always do whatever you want. In my world, I can do whatever I want, and I do whatever I want, but I don't want to harm people. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to have their family members come and hunt me down and make me wish that I hadn't done the things that I did. I don't want the IRS to get me. I don't want law enforcement to do bad things. Though in some instances, if I'm a real harmful actor, or if I'm behaving in a way consistent with the deterministic forces in my life, do antisocial activities, perhaps I'm just, like I said, a bob floating on the surface of determinism. But I do what I want. We all do what we want, God or not God, right?
Right. And I suppose that's essentially the hanging point for me. Other people have hurt me, and other people have hurt me in the name of God. And then I go, well, did they get to go to heaven and God's going to make this right somewhere along the way? And as I said, I seem to be in this place where it just seems like there's no use or need for God.
So I have a weird spot with this, because you're talking about, like, you know, especially when you say, like, in virtue of someone hurting you, you know, through God or something. Well, for me, like, it sounds like you're just saying there's a correlation between, like, or, you know, you think there's some correlation there, but to me, it seems that there's some pattern of that people can act pretty crummy and people can act in ways that aren't that, and they can apply some entity like God for the reason why they kind of endow that on you. But for me, it's weird because, like, when you ask the question at the beginning of, like, talking about God's grace, it seems that you're not only sneaking the ontological basis of, like, God in the first place, but then also, like, attributes attributed to God. So, like, I'm already not going to agree with some of these things, right? Like that God, that there is a God, and then that there's this attribute of grace or anything. So my thing is, like, it seems like similar to me saying, like, John, if I just started with John has good genes, and then I use that to get to the reason of why he won the race. Like, it seems backwards in the sense of that the information I'm going to have starts with, well, what do I know? Well, I know that there was a race. I know that races are determined by, like, who runs faster than the other person or whatever, you know, it's defined as in that circumstance. And then you get to, like, John wins the race. Well, then what else does that infer to me? Well, through, like, biological studies and things of that and anatomy, well, then I can find out, like, oh, well, we found out about these things called genes. And then we can kind of relate the attributes between, like, genes to the fact that Joe can run fast. So, but if I had started with the ontology of genes existing, right, the way that you start with God and his grace, like, I'm potentially doomed on every step after that if I'm wrong, as opposed to starting with epistemology and going, hey, well, what do I know about the situation? Well, okay, well, I know there has to be a reason why John ran faster. And once I go through an epistemic, like, inquiry, then I come to the conclusion that, oh, there's these things called genes. And so that's why this whole thing for me is a little weird. Maybe I'm hearing it wrong, but it seems like you're starting with the ontology and then working backwards. And I just always oppose that type of view.
Let me state it again, as well as explain a little bit more. Right now, I'm kind of in that halfway, or maybe even like 75 atheist, 25 Christian. But what I'm stating is that when I was a Christian, I would sit there and I would say, like, so many Christians have hurt me so much. Like, what is God's grace? And now that I'm in this, 75, 25 place, it seems like God lets you do whatever you want. Well, then where is God? What good is God if just life happens the way it is meant to happen?
I got this, Mike.
So
go ahead, Andrew.
I think I'm finished, unless there's some more confusion and I got to explain myself better. It certainly sounded a lot better in my head than the way it came out.
Sure. It's a theme for myself as well.
Yeah. as well as me too. Also me. Andrew, I think, Tolkien notwithstanding, I think what you're dealing is you're leaving a belief system and the insufficient explanations inherent to that belief system, that God loves you, God protects you, that there's justice in the universe, that if you behave a certain way, then you will win, I guess. and you're seeing the cracks.
I have believed that, but no, I haven't. Yeah, I have believed that, yet I have not received anything good.
There's cracks in that. Like, wait a second, that didn't happen. Or if you pray real hard, you're going to get what you want, or you're going to get something else that's better, or at least more useful to you, or God's teaching you a lesson, or you need to learn humility, or whatever it is. Okay, it's counting the hits and ignoring the misses. Okay, and so now what you're trying to do is you're fading away from what you are perhaps realizing is an unsupported belief in a metaphysics, and you're still trying to apply the tools that were in that toolbox to understand the world around you. What we're saying is this, that human beings can be very wonderful to each other or very cruel to each other, or anything in between, indifferent to each other. And that God's grace doesn't really factor into any of this if you don't believe in God. That sometimes people get away with it. They don't deserve it, but they get away with it. And in society, we've sort of banded together to prevent not only people from getting away with it, but trying to get people to not even commit these terrible actions to each other to begin with. And we do that by having close connections with each other. And yet there will still be those who try to game the system. Okay. So if God's grace seems like a pass, and it kind of does in that mythology, it kind of does seem like a pass. Kind of like if the Eagles were to carry Frodo and the ring to Mount Doom, that would be a pass by Manwë and ultimately by Iluvatar. But the truth is, life is hard, and it's wonderful. It's ecstatic. It's struggle. It's a test. It's a lot of things, and there are no easy, good answers. And the only way you can really navigate the vicissitudes of life is through patience and determination and compassion and caution and bravery and all of these other things, hard work. And maybe you'll never get that, well, that's not fair, but there'll be a comeuppance eventually. That's great. You've heard probably your parents tell you, well, that's life, kid. It's not fair. Well, that's life. Well, that's life. And sometimes these terrible people acting under the aegis of whatever God they believe in will say they can do whatever they want because this is what God tells them to do. Suspiciously, God tells them to do what they already want to do a lot of times. And so I guess as you go along in this journey, and maybe you'll go closer to a God belief, a different God belief, a more holistic God belief that incorporates human experience more and the realities of human society and the human biology and psychology and such, or you will step away entirely and realize the whole thing is, at least the belief system of the people around you who are using this in a hypocritical way, are just full of shit. And you'll need to distance yourselves or compartmentalize them into a category of potentially harmful people. But that's all I got. So I think forget about God's grace for now. Figure out, is there a God? Do you believe in a God? And if you don't believe in a God, don't worry about God's grace. Just realize that sometimes people are shit. Yeah. But they're not always shit. Sometimes they're great, like Jmike.
Well, that's a compliment, but
oh, you're shitty too sometimes, Jmike.
Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
I'm sure.
I was like, let's be fair.
Is that good? Do you think is that answer your question, Andrew? And you got anything else?
I think it does. I think to flesh it out a little bit more, I have gotten angry on multiple occasions. Like, why do I have to live life? Well, A, you have lived life, and B, maybe in the areas that you have not lived life, Andrew, you need to, grow up and live life more. So yeah, you guys have answered the question quite well. Yeah. Yes.
Andrew, thank you so much for calling. I think the only way out is through. Persevere through the difficult times in life. Find people who support you in good, healthy activities. Grow as a person. Grow past those people. The best vengeance for people like that, the naysayers, the haters, the difficult people who are after, they have some creep agenda, is a life well lived. So live that good life. Okay. And call back with your progress, please. I want to hear how you are in 6 months. All right.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Right, yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah. So like my kind of point that I was trying to make sure I wasn't missing the mark, but it's this idea that I feel like people kind of start with some ontological base, like this thing exists. And I'm always like, well, like, will we do that for genes? No. I mean, we would like we would follow like an epistemic route to get you to like what that thing is. And then in philosophy, some people will even argue that it doesn't tell you that, but you get 3 philosophers in the room and they'll tell you that there's not 3 philosophers in the room. So there's that as well. But, anyway, so I wanted to mention two things that are probably the most important to me, from the announcement standpoint. If you really like the discussions that we're having, you want to continue those discussions, we have a Facebook group. Well, I'll go to the Discord first. Actually, it's tiny.cc/ACA Discord, where you can have live chats after the show. Really at any time, even days where we're not doing any ACA stuff at all, there's people in there hanging out. Sometimes they do. I've been in there where they've done, just games or just talking about different things, philosophy, religion, things outside of that. So that's a really good tool. But the Facebook group as well. It's a Facebook. Both of these are fan run, but the Facebook group is FG or Facebook.com/ I think it's groups now / Talk Heathen FG. I think before the groups wasn't there. So make sure you add the groups part to that if that has changed. The reason why I mentioned that they're important is that the reason I'm in the chair I'm in is from interacting with a lot of people through groups like that. Most of the people I know in the scene, in terms of the scene, what do I sound like? I'm in sneaker culture or something, like buying Nikes in the scene. But people I know in the community, I don't have many people around myself, and I feel like that's a common thing that we get a lot, is complaints of like, hey, I don't know people, I feel like I'm isolated. You're not. We've all heard it a billion times, and I quickly realized that I'm not, and then it got me into arguments and debates, and now I'm doing what I love to do. So I stress that as a point to look into those things.